Greetings, gamers. I shot this video briefly before, but I decided to delete it because I babbled way too much. Anyway, it's taken me a while to get this video put together, mostly because my camera has escaped my desk. It basically was dragged down by the panic of my dog, who is afraid of thunder. Of the two, she is the most stoic, except for thunder. It's very odd. The other one wants to talk to you and tell you off and all sorts of other things, and this one's just there. Except for the thunder. It scares her. I don't know why. And I've tried everything. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I shot this video and showed you it before I covered it, but I took my cover off my Buffy game because I'm not playing Buffy right now, and put it on my 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons book, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous book, to tell you the truth. It is thinner than 3rd edition Player's Handbook. It's thicker than 1st, so it's kind of a trade-off. But to tell you the truth, there's good things in the book. There's sample monsters, which makes it easy to get going with just the Player's Handbook. The monster manual did come out today, I believe, but I'm not going to be able to pick mine up until next month, which is in October. Now, the thing is, 5th edition has this sort of spiritual idea, not really spiritual, that's not how I wanted to do it, sort of overarching essence, that's better, overarching essence that they're trying to bring back as many people to Dungeons and Dragons as possible. So they basically created a game where they put together a lot of different elements from the different editions and tried to make them function so that more people who didn't like, say, 3rd edition like me, would come and play it. And I think they've done a good job. Now, it's not perfect. Very, very rarely has there been an edition of D&D that I've thought was perfect. And I'm weird, and I'm one of those people who I like 2nd edition. I don't think it's perfect now, but when it first came out, I thought it was perfect, exactly what I wanted from D&D, which was, you know, made a lot more sense. But that was 2nd edition. It was basically a game designed to tell Middle Ages fantasy story, as in we're basing it mostly on the technology of the Middle Ages, etc., etc., etc. And in some ways, it's not exactly what Dungeons and Dragons has been. I mean, just looking at the original Appendix N will tell you that D&D is not necessarily drawn from the Middle Ages fantasy or pseudo-European fantasy worlds. There's not necessarily just worlds with castles and dragons and all this stuff. Now those are there, but there are also worlds with huge cities and grubby thieves, you know, fighting it out as elder chthonic sorcerers of the deeps try and make forays through the sewers to come up and conquer the city, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's everything from science fantasy and other, you know, broader fantasy elements than just your standard medieval setting. In fact, you've got sword and sorcery, you've got sword and planet, and all those in many ways kind of make up what D&D has been able to do over the years. This particular edition is in many ways true to allowing that, depending on how you tweak it. But it's specifically a game designed to allow the GM to make the decisions. Instead of buying another source book, you can, for say Oriental weapons, and for saving space, they basically said, well, a nunchuck is basically a club that with 2 clubs attached with a chain, you know, and in the hands of a skilled user, it's more than that, but their hands of the skilled user is a monk in D&D. So the weapon itself is just written up as basically a form of club. And that's, in many ways, it's an interesting compromise. I think they could have probably saved some space, actually, in wordage, by just listing those weapons, even if their stats are identical to a club. You know, just nunchuck, here you go, or whatever. But, you know, their design decisions are their design decisions. I am a bit annoyed, perhaps, by the odd choices they made in elf skin coloring. because there's a lot of blue elves, and I guess in many ways it allows them to basically go, aha, we put something other than white people in here. They're all blue. But I'd have been okay with the elves all dark skinned, with skin tones of other, members of the human race other than white guy. I'd have been okay if they were, looked more African, if they looked more Persian, if they looked more Chinese. I'd have been okay with that, But then again, I'm one of these guys who's like, they're all white. Let's do something different. Because at the end of the day, I can pick up about a bazillion games that have pictures of guys who are, well, vaguely like me, more buff, hopefully. I mean, hopefully a little more buff, but, not that I am terribly unathletic, but I am about as unathletic as you can be and exist on this planet. I do enjoy martial arts, and I've practiced martial arts for several years. Not most of my life, but a chunk of it, more than a decade, I've put into it, and enjoyed it. But the thing is that I'm never going to be buff. Let's just be honest. I know what I am, and I'm a big white guy. It's the way I'm shaped. My genetics have said you're going to be a big white guy, and without a better metabolism, I'm not going to be much else. But I'm okay with D&D art showing stuff other than white heroic males. More women, more fantastic representations of humanity in general. For any skin color would have been fine other than white. So I guess blue is an acceptable compromise somewhere in there, but it's kind of interesting, mostly because it's mostly blue and purple elves. Everybody else, well, they do get human skin tones. So I mean, there's woman dressed sort of as a samurai. There's some dark-skinned people. There's some light-skinned people. There's pale as snowflake elf, and then there's drow, all in the book. Generally speaking, though, 5th edition seems to have done a good job of bringing me back in. Remember, I grew up with basic and 1st edition, and then adopted 2nd edition when it came out, and liked 2nd edition, but I didn't like 3rd edition. So for me, it's brought me back to D&D. Now, I won't go crazy and spend the kind of money I spent on 2nd edition. I probably spent a couple grand on 2nd edition books over the years, or more. I mean, because I had virtually every rule supplement material that I had, and 4 or 5 box set game settings, and so on and so forth. I even had the spell cards they put out, which I bought because I got a discount where I work. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, it seems to have brought me back. I have a friend who has only ever played 3rd edition, and he is liking 5th edition. It's not perfect. He kind of likes some of the cool things they did in 4th edition for the Warlord, but he didn't really care for 4th edition. He just liked the Warlord class, and there's some elements in here that can simulate that, which is a very good thing. Now your character is defined by race, by class, and by profession. Profession gives you certain pieces of equipment, tools, and proficiencies. Races give you certain access to certain things that are necessarily maybe outside of your class, depending on if you're a dwarf or an elf or whatever. Like an elf wizard can get access to a longsword simply because of their racial bonus. Gives them proficiency in that. While a dwarf mage can wear armor. So it's a very functional, very simplified version of D&D in many ways, but not simplistic. Still roll a d20, still add your bonuses up. Bonuses are more constrained than in 3rd edition and maybe 4th edition. I didn't play it long enough to know. But they are more constrained. Things will tend to have a lot lower numbers, lower armor classes, lower saving throws, lower most everything. But there are some changes that are important. Spellcasting has changed. Whereas before, a default wizard had a number of slots that they had to prepare their spells to cast. Those preparations were also basically, like in 1st edition terminology, memorized. If you have 5 slots of spells, you put A, B, C, D, and E spell in there, and those are what you cast. Now, there are options that have changed that. The sorcerer can pretty much do any spell with his slots he wants. But you have a lot of slots in the long runs for the wizard. Now, what they've done with 5th edition is reduce the total number of slots you get, but you still get a decent amount of slots. But you can prepare spells, but those are not your slots for casting. The preparation is separate from the slots for casting. So my character might be able to prepare 4 spells. So he has these 4 spells, all their components, their everything all ready to just go boom, the spell to go off. But he may only have 2 slots or 3 slots. But he can choose any one of those prepared spells to cast in those slots. So he can cast 3 spells per rest, for example, and might have, as I said, 4 or 5 prepared. But that gives him a repertoire of 5 potential spells for the situation. And that grows, a little quicker, I think, than slots. But I'm not sure, because I've only played a wizard for one level. So, but it allows the flexibility while still keeping the basic slot mechanic intact. And it keeps it from limiting to where you literally have 1 spell per 8 hours, and that's it. You're a first level character. You never get to do anything but, boom, I'm done. I magic missiled the guy. I slept the guy. Now, admittedly, I have a preference for basic D&D for good reason, because magic missile in that game could be lethal to many of the creatures you'd run into at a level where you'd be using magic missile. Because it did 1d6 plus 1 damage, and player characters didn't have, 15 starting hit points. They had 8. Or more often, 4 or 5 or 6. Somewhere in there. So a d6 plus 1 was a potential immediate kill. Non-missable, non-saving throw. Boom. It made the wizard powerful, but only for that 1 second. And that's how it felt. 1 second of power, infinite power. Now, that depended upon on your spell choices. And now you have more spell choices of what you can cast, but slightly fewer castings in the long run. And that feels right. Feels like it's a good job. Weapons are fairly simplified. They're streamlined, a little closer to the later editions than the earlier ones. There's not 4 million different polearms and 4 million different kinds of swords, which, you lose some verisimilitude, but you get some functionality and enjoyment out of not having to worry about it as much, and all these detailed equipment lists. I have made 3 characters for D&D. I made 1 for encounters. I made 1 for a friend running online, and I made 1 for a friend running in person, although that was also using part of the same adventure as encounters, so that may not continue. They've all been different. One's a cleric, one's a ranger, one's a mage, and I like, or a wizard, and I like the differences of feel. I like how they don't feel like just a generic wizard necessarily. They immediately speak with flavor based on his profession. It gave me a story for why my drow elf, because I haven't played a drow elf since 1st edition. Yeah, a long time ago when they were first playable. I played one, and I haven't played one since then that I recall anyway. But I played a drow elf in 5th for one part of an adventure, and I enjoyed it. It's interesting. It's creative. It gave me a good reason to be out adventuring in the world, because of the little new things like your motivation and your trinket and all these little things it's added that are role-playing hooks that added stuff to the game. For example, my character was a guild leader, a guildsman in the alchemy guild. He's an alchemist. That's basically his job. Sure, he's a wizard, but he's also an alchemist. That's what he does for a living, because wizardry doesn't apparently pay the bills. Well, it says that somebody betrayed him and hurt his work, and so he's out to get them. So I just decided, well, maybe he's a wizard, and they wanted him to spy on the people he worked with, because fundamentally, as an alchemist, he probably couldn't find all the things he wanted in the Underdark, so he had to go out and get, oak tree leaves, these rare ingredients that his kind don't really have. Sure, you just leave the cave mouth, but you have to go miles to get to the cave mouth. But it gave me a reason for him to be out adventuring. It gave me a reason for not liking and not wanting to go back to where he's from. And it hooked me. The adventure, I don't know about these encounters adventures. They seem kind of dry and flat to me. And that is not necessarily saying that the dungeon masters are bad, because I know the dungeon masters are not. But in the long run, It feels to be a version of D&D that more people can get behind than previous editions. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. It feels like it to me. I highly recommend it. I suggest you try it out. My dog is trying to climb under the desk, so I'm going to cut this short. Peace, good game.